of a classic archipelago, like what you might find in British Columbia or Southeast Alaska or even Norway. So it's glacially carved, and there's a lot of inlets and tons of islands. The coastline of Maine itself is about 4,000 miles long.
You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Curt Linville.
Hi friends, thank you again for joining the Adventure Sports Podcast today. I have Austin Addis with us, and Austin wanted to come on the show to tell us about the Maine Island Trail. And when I first heard that, I'll admit I had no idea what it was. When I first heard that, I thought, oh, it's a backpacking trail or a hiking trail or something, but it is not. It is a water trail that winds through over 200 islands, 375 miles along the coast of Maine. And so the idea behind that trail is that it's a waterway that you can travel in sea kayaks or sailboats or even power boats. And I am super excited to hear more about it. I had no idea it even existed. So Austin, thank you for coming on the program to share with us what this Maine Island Trail is about.
Thanks for having me, Curt. Big fan of the show. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So Maine Island Trail, I think there are a lot of people that know Maine is kind of cool, but it's way up there in the upper right. And, you know, I did travel through Maine once, Austin, and my plan was to camp there and experience a little bit, but I wasn't accustomed to the size of states in the Northeast. And we drove all the way through Maine and found ourselves in Boston before we realized. And so I feel like I missed out on one of the nation's great treasures, because Maine, I have heard, is just astounding. And what I saw as we drove through several years back was that it was a beautiful natural place. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of encapsulate that for us? Tell us more, because I would like to learn more about Maine.
Of course. Yeah, so the state of Maine is rather large, at least relatively for East Coast states. So there are a lot of regions that make up. And I believe the whole upper third of it is very, very sparsely populated, and it's one of the most remote areas still on the East Coast. But coastal Maine itself is one of the most special aspects of Maine, and it's kind of a classic archipelago, like what you might find in British Columbia or Southeast Alaska or even Norway. So it's glacially carved, and there's a lot of inlets and tons of islands. The coastline of Maine itself is about 4,000 miles long. And if you stretch that out in a straight line, that actually is longer than the state of California, and I believe even including Oregon. So just for a little bit of context, how much coastline there really is just in the state of Maine.
There's a lot of zigzag there.
A ton of zigzag. Yep. And the number of islands that there are, there's by certain, depending on how you count, between 3,000 and 4,000 islands.
Wow.
And that discrepancy is around, how do you count an island? Is a ledge that's barely sticking above the surface, is that considered an island or not? So plenty of coastline to explore. It's, far from just a straight line up the coast. The trail itself, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, is, if you measure in a straight line, is about 375 miles. But there's actually about 4,000 miles of coastline itself.
So if you go straight as you could go, then it's 375 miles. But if you zigzag along the coast and take it all in, that's a completely different experience. I mean, that's a factor of 10 more.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the beautiful things about this trail. It's really different than your standard hiking trail in that you're just kind of following one known dedicated pathway. There's just a scattering of islands that you can link them together in whatever order you want, depending on the type of trip you want to have. You can hug the coast really closely if you want to. You can be more out at sea if you want. And you could do the trail, every year for your entire life and, not stay on the same islands twice if you wanted to.
So something else that's mysterious about this for me is that hiking trails change a little bit with erosion and stuff. Maybe there's a fire, there's some sort of an insect event that changes the vegetation. I mean, things happen, right? But they're pretty fixed. And if you hike the same trail several times, you'll see subtle differences, but it's the same trail. But when you're on the water, it's dynamic. Mm-hmm. It's constantly changing, and it responds to the weather even I would say more violently maybe than, being on a hiking trail in the woods. I could see that you would have a different experience every single time just because the weather would change it, or the tides. The tides don't happen at the same time. They rotate around the clock. And so everything could be so different just because of the dynamics of the water. There's something so mysterious to me about the water, and learning to read it enough to know. I mean, if you're in a sea kayak and you don't want to fight big waves, then you have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to read the conditions, and you don't have to worry so much about that on a hiking trail, right?
Definitely.
So it really adds a lot to the experience, I'm sure. So you did this trip.
That's right. Yeah.
When was this?
This was in 2022, actually, so a little bit ago now. But I still do a lot of paddling on the Maine coast. But had to take advantage of that window that I had in life to do this one.
Okay, and where are we talking to you now?
So I am in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I live.
Okay, so that's a little distance from Maine, but not horrible. How long does it take to get up the eastern seaboard there?
Between 9 and 10 hours usually. So driving,
okay,
not too bad.
So it's day trippable.
Well, yeah, we do it
back
in a day
to get there. Yeah,
that's right. But yeah, the kind of going back to your point about the sea being like a really different draw and having a different kind of feeling to it than land trails. That is one of like the really special components about it, and it's just really different. It's a water trail, of course, and navigating all of the things that you were alluding to, such as tides, current, fog, boat traffic, exposed crossings, all those type of things. Definitely add a risk factor to it. So there are points where it feels like, if I were to kind of draw the parallel of backpacking or something, where you're going through a mountain pass, or you're in an alpine zone where you want to be, really swift and calculated about how you, attempt a certain, task, I guess. But there's plenty of like calm, serene moments as well, where you just kind of soaking it in and enjoying the beauty of it.
How sheltered is it? We're talking about saltwater. We're talking about the ocean, but there are also islands and fjords and what have you. So, I mean, is it pretty exposed in places? Is it pretty sheltered most of the way? What would you say?
Yeah, it runs the full gamut. The coast itself, there are inlets that go really far inland, or you can be extremely sheltered. And then the opposite is true as well. There's, especially when you're going around some of these peninsulas, they can stretch pretty far out to sea, and you're getting the big swell, you're getting the heavy winds, and those are times where you want to be careful about when you're doing it. And the other kind of bigger risk factor that has to do with tides is watching out for a tidal run, which is essentially when you have a lot of water transferring through a narrow opening, which generally happens around mid-tide. And that's when you could find yourself in a really strong current. So if you're heading in the right direction, that's amazing. You're getting a nice boost from nature toward your destination. But, the opposite can be true as well, where it's too strong to paddle against, essentially. And you need to either take another route or just wait till a different tide.
Wow. So you did this in I'm assuming, a sea kayak.
Yep, that's right. It was a 14-foot Delta sea kayak, and it was solo, actually, as well.
Wow,
which is, probably not the preferred or recommended way to do a trip like this. Having the safety of a partner is preferred. But, when certain adventures call in life, and you can't wait around for your friends to say yes, and sometimes you just got to go for it.
Okay, so I tried to go sea kayaking in the Pacific Northwest once, and the guide company we were working with shut it down. They said, no, it's too much swell today. The waves are too big. We're not going to do it. And I looked out, and I just thought, it doesn't look bad to me, which kind of highlights, I mean, I believe what they were saying, right? But it kind of highlights the limitations of sea kayaking, maybe. I guess, what kind of conditions are too much for a sea kayak?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of it depends on your experience and the equipment that you have too. Generally, if a sea kayak is a longer boat, as opposed to a whitewater boat, which is very short. So that helps make it more seaworthy and helps it kind of cut through the chop and through the waves. Um, and just experience too. Knowing how to navigate a tricky situation when there is a lot of swell coming at you. You want to kind of point your bow into the waves, right, as opposed to getting hit on the side or on the beam, in which case you could kind of roll. But yeah, it really just depends too on the geography of where you are, because if you're exposed, it can be very dangerous. If you're sheltered, it could be very safe. Even on a windy day offshore, it could be really calm inshore. So just a lot of different factors there. Also, if you're with a guide or not is a factor. Sure. A guide might be able to assist in the event that something were to go wrong. And actually, I do have a background in sea kayak guiding, so that was part of the...
Okay, so that helps a ton.
Yeah, it does. Yep. I don't know if I would have attempted this if not for that.
Well, so you could kind of stretch and say that you had a guide with you.
Yeah, definitely.
You are the guide, so that's
exactly.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, I was going to ask you about rolling a sea kayak.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on the boat, I know. But it also probably depends on how much gear you have and where that gear is located in the boat. I mean, I did some whitewater kayaking years ago, and I'm familiar with that. But how hard is it to roll one back up again if you flip?
Yeah, it could be hard for sure, and I'm not great at it. But yeah, you can roll a sea kayak in the same way you can roll a whitewater boat. But yeah, when it's loaded down with gear, it makes it even that much more challenging. So I'd be prepared to do a wet exit if in the event that I couldn't roll, if I were to take a spill. But yeah, in that case, there's a number of other protocols in place as far as what you do at that point. But fortunately, that didn't happen to me. I had it was smooth sailing for the whole trip.
Wow. Well, so I had to swim, is what we used to call it. I had to take a lot of swims when I was learning to kayak. But I always had the bank of the river or the creek right there. There was an out, although not always an easy one. I did get pretty banged up in some rapids and things over, But I'm just thinking about, okay, you were talking about going around a big peninsula or crossing an inlet, or you could have some really exposed areas, even miles to shore, I would guess. If you have to do a wet exit and there's water in the boat, what do you do?
Yeah, so when you are far away from shore, that's the most dangerous point, of course, which there was only about 3, in my particular trip, there was only about 3 big channel crossings where at the most I was a mile and a half from the closest shore. So it was about a 3-mile crossing, so the midpoint of that. And that's too far to swim, really, especially with a heavy boat. If you are close to shore and you wet exit, I mean, there are ways that you can self-rescue. We have a thing called a paddle float, which you essentially just inflate and attach to the end of your paddle, and it serves as an outrigger, and it kind of helps assist you climb back into your boat. Cool. But if you're close to shore, you can also just swim to shore, and much of the trip was pretty close to shore. If you are in the middle of a channel, it's a different story. At that point, kind of make yourself visible so you're not, a target for, further injury or to expedite the danger. But yeah, hailing down another boat, if you can't self-rescue, that's probably what I would try to do. And then, of course, we have a lot of the safety gear like horns and flares and whistles, and always wearing a PFD 100% of the time. And then a VHF radio, you can always call for help. And in this particular area, there's recreational boaters and there's quite a few lobstermen, so there's usually someone around that could lend a hand.
Someone could pluck you out of the water.
That's right.
You had to. So if your boat were to fill up with water, it's going to be extraordinarily heavy. And even if you could get back in it, it's going to be unstable, and you'd have to try to bail while you're getting knocked around by the waves. I mean, if you flipped, it's probably because the conditions aren't great to start with.
Yeah.
That sounds dicey, dude.
It can be, yeah. I mean, if it's looking rough out there, the safest thing to do is just wait it out. Stay on an
Okay.
island. Don't put yourself in any danger that you don't need to. Um, and similarly, if you're backpacking, which is kind of where my adventure background is, so I can draw some parallels to that. But yeah, you might not go through a mountain pass, shortly before nightfall, or if there's a hailstorm rolling in or something like that, you might just wait. Same deal. But a good sea kayak has two bulkheads, which is just like a divider that divides the boat into multiple compartments. So even if your center compartment where you sit in the cockpit gets full of water, in theory the boat should still float. But sometimes people put additional flotation in the boat too, which is just like inflatable bags and that sort of thing. But as long as you can still self-rescue, even in a swamped boat, we do have little pumps that you can kind of pump out the water, and then sponges and so forth too.
Okay, so for all of you that are like me and you've never sea kayaked, that's how you survive. It sounds really interesting. All right, so you did this trip. How long do you think your trip was? So they say 375 miles if you're pretty direct, but
Yep.
how far do you think you went?
So I do know exactly how far. It was 140 miles. And it was from Booth Bay Harbor to Bar Harbor, for those that are familiar with the coast of Maine. And Bar Harbor is where Acadia National Park is. And that's about 40% of the trail. Again, give or take, it depends kind of how you zigzag around. So it's, roughly 24 miles a day on average.
24 miles a day. How hard is it to do that in a sea kayak?
Yeah, it was. I am guilty of, hiking or paddling more bigger days than I want to. I kind of, in my head, I always set out to have like a chill adventure, and always ends up being kind of intense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a solid 12, 14 hours of paddling every day. Yeah, and the other kind of big difficulty factor here is with those tides and currents, you can often find yourself paddling against the current. You do your best to plan to
Right.
be with the current, but inevitably there will be times when you're against it, and those are the really kind of hard times where you may be paddling 4 miles an hour, but you've got an oncoming 2 mile per hour, or not mile per hour, but
Yeah.
not tide. In which case you're only netting 2 knots of forward progress. So yeah, your energy expenditure isn't always like the units in, units out that you want. So yeah, you have to be a little bit smart about like how you spend your energy, and when it really is worth just waiting it out and just waiting for calmer water.
I would think that the day you start probably has a lot to do with it, because that's going to determine the type of tides that you have during the paddling hours that you want to paddle. But we've got tides going in and out every 12 hours. So if you're doing a 12, 14-hour day,
Hmm.
you're getting it all. There's no way
Oh yeah,
around it.
especially on the coast of Maine with such a variable coastline. There's so many like eddies and whirlpools and tidal runs and just all kinds of interesting things happening, which honestly makes for a fun and interesting experience rather than more flat water, which is great too for different reasons. Um, but yeah, the coast of Maine does experience rather high tidal range, as opposed to like the Caribbean, say, where there's maybe just like a foot or two of tidal range. In Maine, there's around 10 feet, so a
Dang.
vertical feet that is. So yeah, there's quite a big difference between low and high. And on a spring tide, where the moon is aligned in such a way that you
Right.
get those extreme tides, it can be like 20% greater even.
Hmm.
And as you go up the coast of Maine, even further north, they become greater still, all the way up to the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, which is famous for having the greatest tidal range in the world, which is I think like 48, 50 feet.
Wow. So why do the tides get more extreme as you go north?
I think a lot of it has to do with the geography, the way that the land is structured to kind of funnel water in and out. Um, I believe in general, northern latitudes experience higher tides. Northern and southern, the extreme latitudes experience greater tides as well. But I know a lot has to do with the shape and the contours of the land.
Okay, I'm starting to visualize this, and I might be completely wrong. So all of you maritime wizards out there, go into the show notes and straighten me out. But if I think about the North Pacific, it is like a funnel, right? And if I think about the North Atlantic, it kind of is like a funnel too. The continents kind of come in toward each other, and then you get pinched off by Greenland and Iceland and all that kind of thing. So then think about globally, you've got the moon tugging water like toward close to the equator, right? And that's where the bulge of water is. But that's where you also have the biggest bodies of water. So it's just like you were saying, it's the shape of the land maybe, because all that water that goes toward the moon somewhere around the equator has plenty of width, plenty of places to go.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it goes the other way and it's getting pushed north, I mean, the North Atlantic is far more narrow than like the equatorial Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably all that it is. You probably nailed it right there. I'm starting to understand.
Yeah, and I'm far from an expert on the subject, but I've experienced it out there at least, as far as paddling against the current and being like, oh man, this sucks.
Well, it sounds very, very interesting. Okay, tell me about the water. We have all sorts of beaches, all sorts of water temperatures, clarity of the water, the size of the waves, all that kind of stuff. What did you find in Maine? What is the water like?
So the water is cold, and that is one of the greatest risks of a paddle like this is,
okay.
Hypothermia, essentially. And we were guiding, we would always, be very clear about that. Like, stay in the boat if you possibly can, because, you only have so many minutes before you're kind of entering into a more serious situation. But yeah, I mean, yeah. What else about the water in particular?
Well, is it clear? Is it muddy? Is it?
Yeah. So the coast of Maine is very rocky, as opposed to other areas where it's maybe sandy or muddy. And there are mud flats as well that appear at low tide in certain areas. But for the most part, the water is really clear. And over the years, we've seen some different changes with the ecology, and we used to see a lot more starfish than we do. There still are some. The further north I got, I saw more starfish, that sort of thing. So it's really, really clear overall, but the geography is just beautiful. There's tons of lighthouses. So in Maine, there's about 65 lighthouses in total, and I got to paddle past about a dozen of them. So that was
nice.
One of the things that made the trip really cool. And yeah, it's there's a lot of seaweed and stuff in places, and if you ever got too hot paddling, you can just dunk your hat in the water and you're cooled off pretty quickly.
So the water's pretty cold then.
Yeah. In the warmest time of year, the water may get into the low 60s, but for the most part, it doesn't really. It stays in the upper 50s. Yeah.
And for people who haven't played in water much, water just removes heat from your body so much faster than air. So 50 degrees in the water is cold. That is cold.
Yep. And that's just crazy. Like the upper 3 feet or so from the surface. Once you get a little deeper, it can really cool off.
Colder more. Still.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there's amazing maritime culture in Maine as well. There's shipwrecks you can explore. There's even there's great shipbuilding heritage there. So at one point I found myself paddling alongside a reproduction schooner that was out, on a tour with tourists. Either way, it's very cool just to be out there all by yourself and, just kind of look over and see like a 3-masted schooner, just totally under wind power. It kind of feels like you're in a different era.
Yeah. Living history. That's crazy.
Yeah. And there's even quite a bit of archaeological history too. I didn't see as much of this on this particular trip, but in general, there's a lot of relics of the Wabanaki people in Maine. You can see remnants of fishing weirs as well as shell middens, which are essentially just like big piles of shells that the Native American people would kind of discard their shells after a feast.
I don't know much about this, so I'm not going to speak beyond my knowledge here, but those shell mounds, in some places became a big part of a kind of a religious focus, I understand. And what people said, and these are just anthropologists who are saying, well, it's probably, right? We're all speculating, but it's like, well, it's a high place to stand if you want to talk to a group of people, right? And so people surround the shells and listen to the ideas being shared, whatever it is. So it kind of becomes a ceremonial center. And even people were buried in these mounds too.
Mm.
And
yeah,
I don't know what that was about.
Really cool.
Yeah, I think it was something along the lines of, we're on a rocky shore and there's not a great place to put people, but hey, there's a lot of shells over there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know much about it except it's kind of fascinating. They're not just a pile of shells because people ate a lot, right?
Yep.
And so, I don't know, fascinating stuff. Neat history.
Yeah, I mean, between the geology, the archaeology, the modern culture, there's such a rich maritime culture with the lobstering, especially. There's lobster boats everywhere and lobster pots, which are like the little colorful buoys, just kind of bobbing around everywhere. And yeah, it makes for a magical little experience.
I love it. I love the way you describe it too. It sounds delightful. If people wanted to do the trip, they want to do the trail, then where do they figure out how to do it? What do they need to know? What's the skill set? What's the equipment? All that stuff.
Yeah, so you can always rent equipment or go out with an outfitter, and there are quite a few kayak outfitters in Maine. So that's probably your best bet, is just to get hooked up with a local expert, or even go with a guide. As I did in my short guiding career, I would take people out on overnights or multi-days. Any guide would be very enthusiastic to do that. The equipment you need. I mean, you can do it simply with just a boat and a paddle and a PFD. But if you're doing something more serious for a longer distance, you really want to have a lot of the safety equipment, which again you can rent. But getting hooked up with the Maine Island Trail Association is also a good idea. They are the governing body of the trail. They are the stewards of the trail. Much like the PCTA or the ATC, Appalachian Trail Conservancy. They kind of are in charge of making all this thing happen. And, a lot of credit to them. I believe it's America's first water trail even. So they were really pioneers of water trails, and they do so much stewardship. They have all kinds of events to, help trash cleanup, that sort of thing, and just bring awareness to the trail and to just healthy waterways in general. They're a great resource. They publish a trail guide, which for those that are watching on video, here is the guide. And they come out with a new edition every year. There's also a great app that just kind of tells you which islands are safe to use, because as I mentioned, there are 3,000 plus islands, and not all of them are public, but many of them are. And the trail is open to all boaters, really. It's, for the most part, it's human-powered watercraft. But people take sailboats and small motorboats there as well, and some of them have kind of guest moorings that you can pull up to and spend the night on an island. But the guide is great. It tells you everything you need to know about what resources are available, what towns are nearby, if you need to do a resupply, that sort of thing. And a lot of credit to them, because they actually have a trail log on all the islands, where it's just a clipboard essentially, but you can just write down your name and a little bit of data about who you are and what type of watercraft you came in, that sort of thing. And I most of the time it's just like really inspiring and positive messaging in these logs, so it's really fun to kind of read them, the past people that have visited that island. But there was one time where I gave them a room for improvement kind of upgrade type thing.
Okay.
Politely, and I saw in the next year's guidebook that they had actually incorporated that, which was really appreciated. Yeah.
Well, what was that? Do you mind sharing?
No, of course. So on, I guess, the last night of my trip, I had just two options of where I was going to spend the night, depending on how much energy I had left in the tank, and I decided to push for the latter of the two. So at a certain point, it became my last option. And it was a beautiful island, as many of these islands are essentially just big enough for your tent, and that's it. But this particular island was that small, but also very tall. So, and I happened to land at low tide. So, the tidal range being at least 10 feet, the tent site was another probably 20 feet above that. So I had about 30 vertical feet or so to haul my boat up to the campsite. And, that's what the guide is for, really. It may have had a recommendation like, not ideal for low tide landing, that sort of a thing. Right. In which case I would have maybe stayed on the other island. But, it's an adventure, and that's why it's fun and trying to figure out what to do. And, when you're exhausted at the end of the day of putting in a lot of miles, it's not exactly what you want to do is like haul a few hundred pounds of equipment up 30 vertical feet.
On sharp and slippery rocks, I'm sure.
Yes, that is true. And in this particular, yeah, and the seaweed is very slippery, and there's barnacles on it, and it can actually be one of the more dangerous aspects is slipping on land. And there was lots of starfish, which was very cool, but I was also trying not to step on them, and so that kind of added a complicating factor as well. But really just beautiful coast.
Well, that calls to me, man. I think that type of an experience would be so cool. I've spent most of my adventuring kind of landlocked. Yeah. And so doing something like that, so here's a question for you. We get a lot of adventurers who come on the podcast who do something in an innovative way. They take a new mode of travel in a place where it's never been before. And for a while there, it was people seeing what could be done on a stand-up paddleboard, because they were kind of new to the scene. Everyone's like, well, I wonder what you could do with this. So what alternative ways could people do that? The first thing that pops into my mind is, I'll bet windsurfing could be fun.
Yeah, that could be very cool. I'd be curious to see how someone would kind of pack some overnight gear on a windsurfing kit, that sort of thing. I haven't seen too much of that, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think it would be very cool. What you're saying reminds me of people like unicycling around the world and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think the trail with Maine Island Trail would encourage all the types of different modes of transportation like that. And they have a great blog with lots of great storytelling, and they share a lot of people's adventures. So I haven't seen too many alternative modes out there.
So if someone wants to do it with a sailboat, are the good moorings and things like that set up so they have a place they can park the boat?
Some of them, not all. I would say the minority have moorings, but you can always anchor. And there's either the Maine Island Trail guide or just like a general kind of coastal cruising guide would tell you where there are good anchorages. But yeah, a lot of times you see people just rolling up for the day. They just have a picnic on the island and then go home. That's just like kind of how they spend a Saturday afternoon. Some of the islands are rather large. They could be maybe 100 acres or something like that. So the designated camping area for the trail is just a small section of it. But as I mentioned, other ones are very, very small and are just about the size of your tent. But yeah, and some of them are very close to shore too. Like you could even swim to them. But yeah, there's an adventure for everyone, whatever they're willing to do.
I'm imagining in my mind going to one of these smaller islands and then getting hit by a storm, and big waves are rolling in and they're crashing on your little island, and I'm like, I don't know, dude.
Yeah.
I guess that would be something to watch out for. I mean, obviously people know what would be recommended and not for some of these places, but I can't imagine trying to weather a big storm for a long time on a little spit of rock,
Yeah. I mean, many of them, the vast majority are forested, actually. So the ecosystems are very fragile, and that is something we always drive home, is just to, do all of your normal, nature, best practice stuff, leave no trace, etc. But to an even greater degree on the coast of Maine, just because these little rocky islands, took millennia to develop forestation and vegetation. So, really try not to cut down trees, especially, or even just disturb it in any way. We're just the temporary visitors there. But as it relates to being protected from a storm, for the most part, you're pretty good. If you're on an island, if you're on land, even if it is an island, you're protected. And you're not quite arm's length from the water, but you might be 15, 20 feet from the water, so pretty close. But if it is a super gnarly storm, then maybe you would select a certain island rather than another one where you're kind of protected from the wind a bit more.
Well, that sounds like a new sort of adventure for me, for certain. Why do it, though? I want to, your motivation, but then generally why? There are a lot of people who would say, if I stay home, I don't get salt water in my face, and it doesn't rain on me, and I don't get cold, and I don't risk having to swim in 50-degree water. So why would I go out there in the first place?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think the simple answer, at least for me, is that it just combines all the things I love to do. Like, it's just flat out. I love, multi-day overnight trips. I love kayaking and boating. I also love knots, that sort of thing. And also kind of orienteering and dead reckoning, which is sort of like a seamanship version of orienteering. I feel like at this particular time, I was at a bit of a crossroads in my life and had a lot of things I wanted to meditate on. So a solo adventure, tends to be something that people in our world look to do at those times in life, I feel like, and just try to, search for some answers maybe. Also, I feel like in life, we get so used to just our modern way of living and our creature comforts and just having hot water coming out of the tap, that it's just good to remind ourselves that what our people that came before us had to deal with, and when you do get back to those creature comforts, you just appreciate a soft bed a little bit more. So it kind of keeps you humble, I guess. Yeah. And the last thing I'll add is that there's this phrase that I really kind of tried to embody and to live my life by, and it goes, "When was the last time you did something for the first time?"
That's cool.
By fella John Maxwell. But yeah, so that's just something I always keep in mind, and whether I'm adventuring or not, in life, it's just, always kind of keep learning and growing and try to, improve as a person.
When is the last time you did something for the first time?
Yeah.
That's wild. I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I mean, they're going to new places in a way that you've been before, right? But doing something completely new, that's something to ponder.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of years for me since I tried something completely new.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't have to be completely out of left field, like brand spanking new, but maybe like a new take on something that you've done before. And I would, in the spirit of the adventure communicator Bo Miles, I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, and I think he's been on the show. He talks about the idea of a backyard adventurer. And many of us, including myself, get caught up in regular life and work and everything, and we look for small ways to have our little adventures, even if it's just for like 15 minutes after work or something like that. So he talks about just like climbing a tree in your backyard and how that can be, stepping outside your comfort zone and kind of growing from that, learning from that. And even if it's, in your kitchen experimenting with making homemade kombucha or something like that. So that's an adventure in a way, maybe not an adventure sport per se, but the idea being that it's doing something for the first time.
Yeah, having a new experience. It's fantastic. I love it. I really love it. I have to ask, you mentioned it was at a time in your life when it was good to have time to think about and work out things and maybe meditate on things. Did it work?
Very good question. Yeah. It helped for sure. Yeah. I was kind of in between jobs, and I was, doing a lot of hard thinking about my career and what I wanted to do. I'd also recently gotten married, so that was a very positive thing to reflect on, of course.
Right.
But
big change though, huge change.
Yeah, big change. And one of the things that was sort of interesting that I didn't expect about this trip is like I kind of thought it was going to be much more meditative than it was, and it was to a degree, but it was actually quite a bit more of like active, mental focusing and just kind of actively participating in the experience. I didn't quite have like the free brain space to like let myself wander and think about things. So, in order to keep yourself safe, in order to just be like figuring out your contingency scenarios if something were to go wrong, and just I'm following a little nautical chart the whole time too. So you just kind of just figuring out which point of land you're shooting for and what your compass heading is, and if you kind of run the math on at this speed, at this compass heading, I should land at this coordinate, all that sort of thing. So there was a lot of that going on that kind of was balancing out the more kind of philosophical, meditative side of the trip.
I've heard people that do bike touring talk about how that works pretty well because you fall into a rhythm without having to think a whole lot for long periods of time. You're just following the white line. Sure. And so I can see that could be a little bit more introspective, maybe would be the word. I don't know. Yeah. Or I think that backpacking can certainly be that way. You got to know where you are and what you're doing, but you have extended periods of time when you're just walking down the trail. And
100%, yeah.
Several years ago, I took two of my sons on a 9-day through hike of the Holy Cross Wilderness area, and Travis, the co-host from 10 years ago, he actually interviewed me about the trip, and he asked the question, and it's funny that I remember the question because it was parallel to this, and I thought, oh, wow. It's the one question of his interview that I remember, and it was, how did it change you? How did that trip impact you? We went a route where there were no trails, and we did a crossing over a jagged divide that didn't have a trail, and when I inquired about how to get through there, because all the mountains were so cliffy and precipitous, they said, well, no one's done that, I don't think. And so we were like, oh, really? This could be a first time. Obviously, Native Americans, pioneers, explorers, prospectors probably did it, but there are no trails. So we really got deep, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Right? This was not I'm on a trail where everyone else is. Matter of fact, we went 7 days without seeing another soul.
Wow.
Because there was no one there. And my answer to Travis's question kind of surprised me because I was looking for something more profound. Maybe you were too.
Mm-hmm.
What's
the meaning of it all?
Why are we here? And in the end, my answer was how impactful it was to realize in a very tactile, experiential way that paradise exists and that I could be a part of it for a season. And that may not sound profound, but it was a profound experience for me.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why I think adventure makes sense. And we don't always get out of it what we anticipate, but we're going to get something, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And at a minimum, of course, you were guiding sea kayaking, so you knew a lot of this already, but at a minimum, you could say, well, I am now someone who has done that. I know I can.
Sure.
And would I want to do it again or not? That sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, I feel like some of the most beautiful moments happen on the fringes when you kind of push yourself of what you think you're capable of. And those are the experiences that really shape your life, and that you really kind of carry with you. And in your case, being off trail there, and I know a lot of people that run rivers talk about this idea where, there's the nature in that particular environment, that molecule of water passing by,
right?
That exact stand of trees, it's only ever that way once while you're there in that moment, kind of sharing that moment.
Yeah, it's so dynamic.
Yeah. And if you were to go back the next year, or even a decade later, it's going to look completely different. So it's ever evolving, and, to get to kind of share an experience with that little piece of nature is really special.
Well, will you share a special moment, something that sticks out in your mind from this trip?
Yeah. It really was like a solitary trip in a lot of ways, but one of the things that was really kind of surprising and special was I was staying on this little island all by myself, and the sun was going down, and two people were kind of paddling up in a canoe, which you do see on the coast, but people that are doing the trail are typically in kayaks. And they were kind of circling around the island, and I kind of got the sense that they were hoping to spend the night on this island.
Right.
And I think they weren't quite tripping like I was. Like they kind of had like large coolers, and they were more like car camping in a canoe style. So I kind of waved my arms and flagged them down and invited them to come onto the island with me. Which, and technically it is open for everyone to use and share, but I think everyone's just being a little bit, respectful of everyone else's
That's a stranger.
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, I invited them on and helped them unload their boat, and, we set up camp, like our tents basically touching, just me and this other couple. And here I had come to learn that they were having like a night away from all their kids at home. So this was like their kind of romantic night away that they're sharing the island with me. But, it was people that I likely would never have come in contact with in my life. And we just had a lot of really great conversation and shared our love for the Maine coast. And it was just a really beautiful time.
So this is a solo trip, but it's the people you met along the way that kind of stand out. Isn't that the way it goes?
Yeah. And that is the people tend to always leave a lasting impression for sure. And, the nature itself, though, is always, really powerful for me and for a lot of us. And just seeing the sheer beauty of it all. And when the sun is setting while you're sitting out on a rock eating your, mac and cheese or whatever, and, you hear the foghorn in the distance and you can see, the mountain range up ahead, and just knowing that, like, I'm paddling there tomorrow, those are just all really special times. And you just feel thankful, and you feel, like we're very lucky to be here on this earth at this time and place.
Man, isn't that true? A buddy and I used to get nostalgic about what the Western U.S. would have been like in the mid to late 1800s. And we started even thinking, were we born at the right time?
Yeah, sure.
But then I stop and I look at the opportunities that we have now, the technologies that we have, the equipment that open up opportunities. It's an amazing, exciting time to be alive.
For sure.
I mean, go back 100 years, what kind of equipment would you have needed or would have been available for you to do this trip?
Yeah.
I mean, people, there were sea kayaks back then, but they weren't prevalent, right?
Yeah, especially for someone who's, doesn't spend their entire life growing up in that very hyper-specific ecosystem and environment. Like the lay person isn't as able to access that particular ecosystem or whatever. And you see this too with Everest now. That's kind of like the primary example where you have a lot of people that just like want to write a check and then summit Everest, right? Whereas previously you were just the the 0.1% of mountaineers that were capable of doing that type of thing.
Yeah.
People are overly relying on their gear. Yeah. So it's, as our gear gets really highly technical and advanced, and that's awesome for us, and it's opening up a lot of doors. That isn't to say that you should skimp out on learning the skills and doing the research and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm a firm believer that the most important piece of gear is the space between your ears, and filling that space with the right knowledge and know-how. I mean, that's number one. That's what gets you out of trouble, and it can get you into trouble too, but having all the gear is fantastic, but relying on the gear too much, and that's a big risk. When you say, well, but I've got this thing, it'll save me. Not always.
Right. And just having a reverence and a respect for Mother Nature and the sea, especially because, it can bite you when you're not too careful. But yeah, that's one of the things that makes a solo trip too, of any type, an added challenge because you live and die by your own decisions that you make. And for me, that was one of the things that I was trying to test on this. I had kind of maybe grown in my skill set, and I wanted to put those skills to the test. But yeah, you really, your situational awareness and your critical thinking and your problem solving and all those types of skills that we acquire, you really get put to the test. And if something goes wrong, there's no one else to blame besides you. So yeah, I think those are the things that make those types of trips especially rewarding too. And group trips are awesome for other ways. So I love it all, basically. I like the solo trips, I like the group trips.
Well, I do know, Austin, you're probably the same. Most people are. But if I'm on a kind of a group trip, I might take a little bit bigger chances.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm solo, then I dial it back. And the reason is because if you get hurt and no one's there with you, that's a whole different experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes I think about that dynamic, and I think, a group can get you into trouble because it's almost one-upmanship, or, hey, let's see if we can do this, and there's peer pressure, or, hey, buddy, hold my beer and watch this.
Yeah.
We can play on that, but at the same time, there's something beautiful about having the people there, and then knowing that, one example, just a real simple one, is I do a lot of solo off-road motorcycle riding, and, man, I give a lot of thought to whether or not my bike is mechanically sound and how far I am if I had to hike out from a road, or,
Sure.
What would happen if I crashed and broke a limb? Those sorts of considerations are a big part of the ride.
Right.
But then this spring, Travis and I went to Utah, and we're out in the desert in the canyons and enjoying amazing riding. And I did stuff out there that I had never done before and would never attempt alone.
Yeah.
But it's because there was a backup.
Sure.
Someone I trusted was there,
Right. Yeah. What sort of protocols would you do in a motorcycle situation if you were in the backcountry and you either had an engine failure or, someone was hurt?
Well, people are going to laugh at me, but I spent my first few decades of adventuring before there was GPS and cell phones, and I don't even think EPIRBs were out. There was no way to get help. You were truly had to be self-reliant.
There's no big red button to get airlifted out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have spent a lot of my years of adventuring questioning that dynamic. It's like, I love the idea that I didn't have a way out besides my own grit and ingenuity.
Yeah.
In the past. But I finally, on the motorcycle, I was like, this is not like hiking into a wilderness area where you hike in and you hike out. You know how far you are.
Mm-hmm.
On the motorcycle, and I think it could be this way with a sea kayak too, but on the motorcycle, I can go so far in that walking out is no longer reasonable.
Right.
An hour in could be 3 days out.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
And so a lot of that, I finally broke down and said, you know what? I am going to get the ability to text over satellite at least.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made sure that I had that. And that way, I thought, well, if something really nuts happens, hopefully I could get a text out and a GPS coordinate.
Sure.
Yeah. Because that could be the difference in living and not.
Right.
And so, but a lot of it too is preparation. And I'm sure this was the same way. Matter of fact, we should probably cover this for your trip. But I'm going to altitude in the Rockies. Even in the summertime, you can encounter weather that can be life-threatening. And so when I go, I have the gear I need to spend the night in, below freezing temperatures, in bad conditions. It's just like I take enough gear that I can get through a really bad night.
Mm-hmm.
I take extra food, just a few things that will buy me some time.
Yep.
So what were your backups when you did this trip sea kayaking?
Sure. Yeah. The amount that you prepare for the edge case scenario, right? That's the key question, as far as you could bring all the gear in the world and be super kind of heavy, or you could do the opposite and go super ultralight, but not be prepared when something goes awry. So where's that sweet spot of like
Right.
preparedness, I guess. So in the sea kayak world, it's really just dress for immersion. In the event that you do dump or have a wet exit or swim, your dry suits are ideal. In the heat of summer, that's going to be you're way too hot. But but yeah, just to dress for immersion in that sense. But yeah, I mean something about the Maine Island Trail is that it's not so far remote like you might be deep in the Rockies. So I actually did have cell service the whole time, which is, a huge asset when it comes to staying safe. And, now we can kind of track each other. And my family was kind of watching my little blue dot as I was just, going along.
Right.
So that was, peace of mind for a lot of people. But yeah, a VHF radio, everyone that has a boat generally monitors the channel 16, which you can put out a call, and there's 3 different levels of distress calls: Securite, Pon, Securite, and Mayday, of course. And you can use those in different ways. Some of them may not be like an actual full-blown emergency, like a Mayday call. But yeah, flares, lights, whistles, all that type of thing. Life jacket, like I mentioned before, is super, super important. Stays on 100% of the time, especially when you're alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the safety gear.
My son started doing a lot of canoe fishing this spring, and very early in the spring. I mean, it's below freezing. The water is literally icing up the boat while he's out there. And I just told him, dude, I know you can swim. That's not the point.
Right.
The point is hypothermia and the water temperature. Put on your life jacket. Never not wear it, because you need to at least be able to keep your head above water if you can't do anything else.
Totally.
I mean, that's so important.
Unexpected obstacles, like if you're on a river, you have strainers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you just never know.
Yeah, it's worthwhile. So you said dress for immersion. And I wish we could go on for another hour, Austin, because I'm really enjoying this. I feel like I'm doing something for the first time through you vicariously here.
Right. That's one of the great things about your podcast. So thanks to you for exposing all these ideas to people.
Well, that is the joy of it. It's such an honor to be able to be a part of that. But if you put on a dry suit, dude, I can't imagine how hot and clammy and
Yeah.
So there's got to be a balance. Something where you say, okay, this is tolerable in the kayak, but if I got in the water, it's going to buy me enough time.
Yep. Yeah, so I didn't even bring a dry suit on this trip, full of transparency. I don't even own one because, they cost $3,000 or whatever to have, make your entire body actually waterproof. And I think, as many people know, in contrast with a wetsuit actually allows water in intentionally. A dry suit does not. So they're quite a bit more expensive for that reason. But yeah, it really depends on the conditions that you're going out in, I'd say. Just like if you're river running, you might bring a helmet with you, but you're only putting your helmet on when you're actually running rapids. And like in the flat water between the rapids, you might wear your sun hat or something like that. So It really just depends on the conditions. And, I was very fortunate that the weather window I had was just exceptional. It was just perfect clear skies every day. Even had barely any fog to deal with, which is something that happens a lot on the Maine coast. So yeah, I was able to do line of sight kayaking for the most part, and was able just to find either a point of land or a buoy or a lighthouse or something like that, cell tower, and kind of just use that to jump from point to point. So yeah, didn't encounter any super rough seas. There was one small craft advisory, I will say. This is the one point at which I was potentially putting myself in a situation where I should not have. And I did have to cross a channel, and I was getting a lot of swell on my beam, which is not the direction you want to get hit from waves. But, I made the judgment call in the moment to go rather than, spend the night on an island that was not the right island I wanted to. And it was definitely challenging and, pushing me to my technical paddling skills. But I made it across, and, added to the story of the adventure.
That's a beautiful place to end. Hey, thank you so much. So if people want to learn more about the Maine Island Trail, you mentioned the Maine Island Trail Association, MITA. And what about if they want to follow you? They want to know more about what you're up to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say contact the Maine Island Trail Association, MITA.org, MITA, as it's referred to colloquially. I'm not on social media, but you can always send me an email, and I'm sure you can leave it in the description there, Curt, and people can contact me if they'd like to. Yeah, I really appreciate the time, and thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I really love your enthusiasm and your attitude about sharing such a magical experience and a magical place. So, Maine Island Trail, Austin Addis, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Curt.
Yeah. And for all of you guys out there, guys and gals, obviously, until the next show, do get out there and have some fun and consider sea kayaking. Sounds really, really cool.
Cheers.